Hello, everyone, and you are very welcome to the Wild Side. If you're new here, welcome. If you've been here before, welcome back. So, today I am going to be discussing a topic which is sometimes a hot topic and can sometimes cause a bit of controversy, and that topic is morphs. So, if you're not a reptile person or if you've never heard the term before, morphs are a genetic mutation that produce a specific color pattern or reduction in colors in the pattern on an animal. So morphs are most famous at the moment for the likes of reptiles. So they are most famous in like Burmese pythons, royal pythons, boa constrictors, corn snakes, hognoses, that kind of thing. So a morph is usually naturally occurring anyway in the wild, but sometimes they will happen very rarely because it's a bit of a genetic lottery. But in the wild, morphs are a bit of a danger because animals generally evolve to their current colors, patterns, and things like that in order to hide from predators. So a difference in that color pattern or brighter color or reduction or increase in the pattern often can mean that they're much easier to find when predators are around. So in the wild, generally, morphs aren't long survived because they are much more likely to be found by predators. So in captivity, morphs have become a very sought after thing. So usually what happens is a morph or a genetic mutation will occur and it will then be specifically bred, whichever parent created it will be specifically bred to try and replicate it. And then they'll be bred over and over just to try to actually make more and to make this now a mainstream kind of genetic. So one of the most famous, of course, is the albino Burmese pythons. They were produced by Bob Clark, and then they became super popular. So they've been in media, they've been in film, they've been in TV, they've been in music videos. They are huge. So generally with morphs, once they're first produced, they're huge money, and then as time goes on, they'll be less valuable because they're much more common. So the natural types that you find in the wild, the natural pattern and colors, these are known as commons, normals, or wild types. So with this, it's usually a controversial topic because some people much prefer the wild type or the common, thinking that they don't need to be changed, whereas other people love the morphs. Now, I don't get into the conversation. I love morphs for how they look. Now, I love all reptiles and I love the morphs because I think they just look stunning and they're so different and they're so unique. So I love them myself. However, I do also draw the line whenever a morph causes an animal to be unhealthy. So some morphs unfortunately do carry a problem, and that problem is because they mutate the genetic structure, they can actually cause physical abnormalities or they can cause genetic and hereditary problems such as issues with the neurological system. So for that reason, it's very important that if animals are being bred, that they're being bred when there's no hereditary issues or anything like that present. So it is very important just to make sure as well that if you're going to breed animals, if there's something wrong with the parent, generally it's going to be passed down to the offspring. So it's very important just to make sure that all things like that are considered before breeding. So with genetics, it's actually quite a broad subject, of course. It's something I am far from an expert in. I just have a slight interest because I do like morphs and because I work with animals and breeding is a part of that for conservation. So I have a very, very basic grasp of genetics. So I, of course, am not one to explain how the things work. I just have a base knowledge. So again, like I said, morphs first occur because there is a hidden genetic in the parent that seems completely normal, seems like a completely normal wild type. And then what happens is the new genetic will actually just occur in a random breeding. And then one of the offspring will look different or will have the genome and look what we would refer to as the morph. So the most common of the morphs is albinism or the albinos. So albinos generally the melanin or the pigment that makes the dark colors massively reduces to almost being gone, and the yellows and the oranges and whites fluoresce instead. Sorry, excuse me. So generally You have a snake now that is yellow and white or yellow, orange, and white. And generally, albinism does also cause them to have red eyes because of the lack of pigmentation. So albinos would be the most common. Now, when I'm talking about morphs now today, I'll be talking mainly about royal pythons. They'd be one of the most famous cases of morphs because, again, the morph industry with royal pythons has taken off, and it's just there's so many now. There are so many genetics now that you could have snakes with anywhere up to 12 genetics in them. So they're the ones that I'm going to be focusing on. And because when it comes to morphs, the only morphs I own are actually royal pythons. So that's kind of what I'm going to be focusing on. Of course, if it's something you're interested in yourself, you can research it. There are plenty of topics and places that it's written down, or there's papers on them. There are YouTube channels dedicated to them. There's breeder pages that you can follow that explain them. So there is lots of information out there. Again, I'm just going to be kind of lightly touching on it as a general subject because I am far from an expert. So, as I said, the most common of the morphs is the albino. So albino is a recessive gene. This means it's not a dominant gene. So dominant genes are what you're going to see most of because they are dominant, they do take over, and they're the genes that are most present. So dominant genes, say in humans, black hair. So if both of your parents have black hair, generally you're going to have black hair. But if one of your parents has black hair and the other has blonde hair, black hair is still going to win because it's a dominant. Whereas if both of your parents have blonde hair, you have much higher chance of being blonde. Because when two recessives are mixed, it gives a higher chance for the recessive to actually win the genetic lottery and become prevalent. So the same is true when it comes to reptiles and animals. So if I was to breed a normal or a wild type royal as a father and an albino animal as the mother, the mixture generally will produce only offspring that look like wild types, but one or two carry the gene for albinism. So generally, when a gene is carried but not present, the animal is said to be het for this. Het generally means heterozygous. It's a term used in genetics. So het for the genome means the gene isn't obvious in the animal, but it's carried. So its offspring may have that gene down the line, especially if the gene it's het for is bred to another animal that actually is fully carrying that gene and it appears with that gene as well. It's much more obvious then, and it's much more prevalent that the offspring will have that gene. So if I was to breed my normal to a normal, I'll get all normal. If I bred normal to albino, I'd get normals and normals het for albino. If I bred albino to albino, I'd get albinos and normals that are het for albino. So it's a lot to take in, but over time it kind of makes more and more sense as you go through it. And as I said, I'm not going to be getting too in depth with it. This is just a discussion. So say the best way to go through it and find it out for yourself, as with any genetics, is to use a Punnett square. So a Punnett square is a square which has different boxes for different genomes. So you'll generally have your two parents, which will be AA or AB, depending. So that's where you'll draw out what you have. So you might have normal or wild type and albino as the parents, and then the chances of them, or you'll have the normal and the wild and the albino here, and the mixture. You will then generate what the potential offspring will look like by looking at it through a Punnett square. So normal to normal will always produce normal. Normal to albino will produce normals and normals het albino. Albino to albino will generally make albinos and normals het albinos. So again, it's difficult when you're talking about it and it sounds like I'm saying a lot, but it's actually quite easy once you get into the swing of it. So where it becomes, as I said, a controversial topic is when morphs produce bad genetics in terms of animal health. Now, the most common bad health in morphs in royal pythons is in the spider gene. So the spider gene makes animals that are more yellow but have their darker markings actually thinner, almost like spider webs. So this is a very controversial gene because it creates what we call head wobble. It's a neurological issue. It's not prevalent in all spider genetic royal pythons, but it is present in some. So as the gene was further bred out to other genes, it did lessen a lot and it kind of diminished, but unfortunately it does still occur. So the only animals that I have that have the spider gene, I have two. I have a female called Aphrodite. Now she has bumblebee genetics in her, so she has the spider gene. The bumblebee is spider and pastel when they're bred together. Sometimes the offspring are called bumblebees. They are the spider genome, but the pastels make the yellows and such much, much brighter. So they create a much more visually striking animal. And the other I have is Anubis, who is a little male. Now he has bumblebee in him as well. So he does carry the spider gene, but neither animal have head wobble. Now, I personally wouldn't buy an animal if it had head wobble or any signs. I always double check very carefully if I'm ever buying an animal that has the spider gene, just in case there is head wobble. Another issue that's a neurological issue that they possess is called stargazing or sky gazing or things like that. It's where the animal's head is constantly pointed up at the sky, and feeding and such gets very, very difficult for them because even striking, they can't do it properly because the head is always either looking up at the sky or bent backwards. Now, this is a major neurological issue, and generally it means the animals don't live a full and proper life, and it causes other health problems as well. It causes weight issues because they don't feed properly. It causes issues like stress because you have to force feed, and it causes other issues down the line as well. So unfortunately, with those genes, it's very it's very necessary that you're careful, and that if your animal does have head wobble, you don't breed it, because again, you're just furthering a hereditary problem that down the line will cause more and more problems. So as I said, because of the breeding to other genetics, the spider genome has diminished in its head wobble and stargazing, but it does still happen. So for a lot of breeder expos and things like that, there will always be a careful check to make sure no animals have head wobble. And the same is true in other reptiles as well. In the leopard gecko, I think it's the calypso gene. Don't quote me on that though. I'll have to double check. They also have issues that are hereditary through that line. So it's very important whenever you're getting an animal, one, to do a full health check, two, to do your research, and three, just to make sure you know everything about an animal before you purchase it or rescue it. So I will always do a lot of research before I get an animal, to the point that it's probably overkill. But it's very important before you buy an animal that you know everything about it, and to ensure that you can give it what it needs to be healthy. So with morphs, I'm going to show you now a couple of morphs that I myself own. So when we are talking about morphs, I have 8 snakes in my collection, 7 of which are morphs. The only wild type of an animal that I have is my boa constrictor Kingo. She is a wild type. So what she looks like is exactly what you'd come across in the wilds if you were to go looking for the common boa constrictor. So I have 8 snakes, as I said, 6 of them are royal pythons and 2 of them are boa constrictors. And so I'll run you through a couple of the genomes that I have, what they're called, and what they look like. So first up, we have Miss Bellatrix. So Bellatrix is a young female piebald or pied royal python. So as you can see with the pied, it's actually a form of leucism. So leucism is where a snake is, the pigment is removed and all that's left is a white snake, generally with dark eyes. So piebald is a form of leucism as well, except as you can see, it makes this beautiful pattern where there are just splotches of kind of the normalish color on top of a white snake. So as you can see, she is absolutely stunning, and I absolutely love the pied gene myself. So this is Miss Bellatrix. Say hi, Bella. So Bellatrix is a young female, and she's doing very well with getting weight on her now at the moment. So she's feeding really well. So Bellatrix, as I said, is a pied. So generally you have different types of pieds, and you have very high white pieds as well. So I was talking about hets earlier. Bellatrix is actually 100% het for albino. This means she carries an albino gene, and if she was bred to an albino, the offspring she created would be albino pieds, piebalds, and albinos. So again, she wouldn't be what you consider a high white pied because she has a lot of these spatches of her normal coloration, or normal color, or wild type coloration. So but she wouldn't be a low white either. Low whites are generally mostly the wild type coloration with small splotches of white that don't make a huge impact on the coloration itself. So she would be a mid white pied. So she, as I said, is het for albino. And so I'll introduce you to my next morph, which is Thor. So this is Thor. So Thor is an albino male. Now he's albino 100% het for pied. So as I said, with Bellatrix, she's het, he's het as well. So because she's 100% het for albino and he's 100% het for pied, if I were to mix the two and breed them, I would make albino pied youngsters for the most part. So they wouldn't all be albino pied, but they all would have pied in them. But albino pied would be one of the prevalent genomes because he's 100% het for pied, she's 100% het for albino. So as you can see there with the albinos, the red eyes that they have, and with the albinism gene, you can see how the yellows, the oranges, and the whites just pop. So that's Thor. I'll introduce you to another one of my royals now, and his name is Anubis. This is Anubis. Now he's a high white pied. So as you can see, now as I said, he does have spider genome because he has bumblebee in him. So he's a high white pied. As you can see, he's almost completely white except for his head, where he has what we call a face mask. So he has this beautiful face mask. So he is a bumblebee pied. So he actually has spider in him because he's bumblebee. So he has spider and pastel genes along with the pied. But as you can see, he has no head wobble and he is very healthy. I made sure before I ever went down to collect him. So he is very young. You can tell by how small he is. So he's still growing. He's still doing very well. And hopefully now he'll keep that lovely yellow color in his face mask as he gets older. But he has bumblebee in him, so he does have spider. But as you can see, he's very healthy. This is Aphrodite. Now, like Anubis, she has bumblebee in her genetic structure. So she is a mystic potion bumblebee. So you don't notice the bumblebee too much in her because the mystic potion takes over. So she still has some of the normal royal markings. They're just a different coloration altogether. So what this does, so the mystic potion is generally more purple color, but the bumblebee gene actually reduces that and makes it a little more whitish cream. So this is what happens when the bumblebee gene is mixed with the mystic potion. But as you can see, just like Anubis, there's no head wobble and she's doing just fine. Introduce you now to another one of my snakes. Her name is Belle. This is Belle. Now Belle is a pastel royal. So you would have heard me saying earlier the pastel is one of the two things that make a bumblebee. So as you can see, the pastel just makes the yellows pop. So this is one half of what makes a bumblebee, the other being a spider. So Belle is a beautiful example of a pastel. She's lovely and healthy. And as you can see, no issues at all. So now I'm going to introduce you to the last of my royal pythons, my oldest and biggest girl, Freya. This is my big girl, Freya. So Freya is a pastel ivory. So as you would have heard me say about Belle, Belle was a pastel, which gives a lovely yellow coloration on her head. But ivory is actually interesting. It's a super form. So what that means is her original structure would have been yellow belly, but then two yellow bellies that were bred together created a lovely white snake, which created the ivory. So ivory is a super form of yellow belly. So Freya is the biggest of my royals. She's the oldest as well. And she's a little grumpy today because it's nearly her feeding day. So I won't keep her out for too long. But that's Freya. So this is my Sunglow boa, Hera. As you can see, quite a size difference between her and the royals. So she's absolutely stunning, but this is what the Sunglow gene does to the boa constrictor pattern and color. So it's an absolutely stunning change in my opinion. So it really brings out the pinks, the yellows, the oranges, and just makes for an overall gorgeous and really interesting animal. So we're going to put Miss Hera back. She does get a bit over adventurous when she's out, so I'm going to put her back in so that she can rest up. So as I said, I do have a common boa constrictor and fully grown adult female called Kingo. However, she's going through shed at the moment, so I won't be handling her because it's nicer to leave them alone during this time because shedding can actually be quite stressful for a snake. So overall, morphs are a bit of a hot topic. However, I think it's important to remember they're still just snakes. So if you love snakes, it shouldn't matter what color they are, what the pattern looks like realistically. However, some people really don't like them and some people absolutely love them. Very divided one, but that's fine. Everyone is entitled to their own opinion. Again, I have my opinion. I really like morphs. However, if you don't, that's fine. The main thing to remember is at the end of the day, if you love reptiles, great, because so do I. So folks, thank you so much for joining me on the channel today. So before we finish, I'd just like to say you can follow me on Instagram, on TikTok, on Facebook, and on YouTube where this video will be published. I'll put all the links for those channels into the bio of the video. So guys, thanks a million again for joining me, and I'll see you next time, hopefully, to take another walk on the wild side. Have a great day.